Yeah, so the UN just released a new report, and the kind of high level summary of it, according to the New York Times, is that humans are transforming Earth's natural landscape so dramatically that as many as 1 million plant and animal species are now at risk of extinction, posing a dire threat to ecosystems that people all over the world depend on for survival. And the kind of conclusion that's drawn from this is that like this is a major threat to human beings. And so uh, the Times quotes an ecologist saying we need to build biodiversity considerations into trade and infrastructure decisions the way that health or human rights are built into every aspect of social and economic decision making. And I think a couple reactions to this. Um, One is I have not gone line by line through the entire report. In fact, they haven't released the detailed report yet. This is just a summary. But in general, these kinds of the sky is falling claims, um, I'm a little skeptical going into them just because this has happened for over 60 years that we're just told there's some emergency. The solution is to stop human progress by limiting human freedom. And typically what happens is, whether it's acid rain or the ozone disappearing, is you get the problem either never actually emerges or turns out to be completely minor. And part of what I think is really revealing or interesting about this report is that the whole conception that they have is that human beings are essentially dependent on nature, or at least that it ignores or minimizes the fundamental need to transform nature that we talk about. And so this is just one example of many. I mean, this really runs throughout the report, this idea that we are taken care of by nature and now we're trashing what takes care of us. The New York Times says, in passing, wetlands purify drinking water. And it doesn't even raise or acknowledge the major thing that has purified water and, in fact, made it possible for us to have clean water for billions of people. And that's human action, including the use of fossil fuels. And I guess that whole perspective of dropping out which human beings contribution, like if we're hearing that we're destroying the earth and the ecosystems and therefore impairing our own survival, you would think that, okay, human survival, human health, human access to clean water and clean air, these all must be going down dramatically. And yet, as you catalog in the moral case for fossil fuels, and as others have cataloged, like things have actually gotten tremendously better, particularly in the places having the most impact. So uh, I don't want to dismiss every particular claim of this report, but I'm skeptical of the high level solutions because I'm skeptical of the basic approach.
Yeah, when these things come out, it's it's really as if they were written from the knowledge base of 5,000 years ago. Because, 5,000 years ago, or maybe even 2,500 years ago, you would rightly think of human beings as very much dependent upon the natural environment, what people will call the ecosystem, or probably more accurately, ecosystems. And it's true. I mean, when there was enough water, then we were more likely to have food. And, when there's a drought, a whole bunch of people die. And when there are storms, you can't really cope with the storms. We were completely at the mercy of and dependent upon the non-human environment. And but then we did something which people will often call industrialization, but we can also call it we created a human environment. There really was no distinctively human environment. There was just human beings and then the rest of nature. And what we did is we created a human environment that allowed us to have way more resources with way more reliability and then way fewer threats, um, because we could insulate ourselves from the, inadequacy and viciousness of the rest of nature, from the perspective of human life and human flourishing. So when I hear a story like this saying, oh, well, this species is going to die and this is going to do this, and then human beings are just going to be helpless. No, no, no. Human beings used to be helpless when we depended on nature in this way. And then the thing that we should be really worried about is anything that would make us helpless by dismantling the human environment. And the the number one way of dismantling the human environment, the number one threat, is decreasing or eliminating our access to energy, and chiefly through fossil fuels, since that's our main source of access to energy. So we're not in this primitive state anymore, but they're advocating policies that would bring us to this primitive state, but they give nature credit for our advanced state insofar as they acknowledge it. Because if you acknowledge reality, you have to acknowledge, okay, we have an unprecedented level of human flourishing today. Let's understand that. And you cannot attribute that to the beneficence of nature. It's not like, our resources increased 10 or 100 fold because nature became nicer or because the wetlands became nicer. And even by their account, we've supposedly been insufficiently nice to the wetlands. So we should be getting punished. And so they keep having this narrative, oh, well, it's going to get really bad, but because they don't acknowledge the invention of the human environment. If you don't acknowledge the invention of the human environment, you cannot understand human flourishing, and you're going to make really, really destructive policies. So within the context of, if you acknowledge the invention and the glory of the human environment, from that perspective, you can ask, okay, is there anything we're doing in building and maintaining that environment that has long-term threats? Because, okay, it's doing something to the atmosphere, or there's one particular species, but then, even then, the same means by which we build and maintain the human environment, which is, using a lot of technology powered by a lot of energy to make those better. Those are the same basic means by which we would deal with any drawbacks or any negatives. So, for instance, if we have an issue with CO2, we'll try to figure out how to capture CO2, or try to figure out uh, a really good substitute for fossil fuels that doesn't emit CO2, or how to how to deliberately cool the planet if we need to. But it's all going to be from the perspective of, the indispensable thing is a human environment.